Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. In behalf of the World Association for Sexual Health Officers, I welcome you to this webinar organized by our very esteemed Sexuality Education Committee, headed by Dr. Osmo Montula. This has been a task that has been carried out by this committee for a few months now, and they have put together a wonderful panel of very, very well-known speakers, Doctors Melanie Davis, Jaclyn Friedman, Venkatraman Chandra-Mouli, and moderated by Dr. Karen Rayne, who is a member also of our committee. Dr. Karen Rayne has worked in education for the past two decades with a specialty in comprehensive sexuality education across the lifespan. She writes and edits books and lifespan CSC curricula, trains sexuality educators, and builds collaborative efforts. And I have just mentioned she is very, very active in our Sexuality Education Committee in doing various interesting pieces of work and really helping us along to build a special highlight on this topic within the World Association for Sexual Health. Please, to all our audience that I also welcome across the continents, south and north, please place your names and where are you joining from in the chat. So again, having welcomed you, I will give the floor to Dr. Karen Rayne, that will have the pleasure to introduce our very wonderful speakers today. Karen.
Thank you so much, Esther. Welcome, everybody. I love seeing all of the names and all of the locations that you're joining us from all over the world. It's just a delight to be here with you together today to talk about a topic that I'm really interested and exciting to have here as our discussion. As the Sexuality Education Committee for the World Association of Sexual Health, we were considering what topics we wanted to talk about and looking at sexuality education outside of the classroom felt like a really exciting and innovative topic that would draw in people from all over the world, which it has, and I'm just so thrilled. So please keep dropping all of that into the chat box, letting us know where you're from. I think we're going to have some really fantastic conversation today, and I think we're going to have time at the end for questions. So please do drop those questions. You can drop them into the Q&A box as you think of them. And so we will gather those all up at the end and come on together as a panel, and I'll be moderating that. We're going to start off our conversation today with Dr. Melanie Davis. Her topic is Our Whole Lives, Transformative Sexuality Education Across the Lifespan. And she is an award-winning sexuality educator, counselor, and advocate with over 25 years of experience. Her work is dedicated to promoting inclusive, anti-oppressive, and sex-positive education across the lifespan. Melanie, thank you so much for being here. It is always a delight to see you, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about sex education within faith-based communities.
Thank you, Karen. It is a delight to be here, and I am, this is a new audience for me, so thank you for the welcome. I am the Our Whole Lives Sexuality Education Program Manager for the Unitarian Universalist Association. And today I'm going to be sharing a model for faith-based lifespan sexuality curriculum that can be adapted for other faith settings. This can be especially useful in areas where school-based sex ed is limited by time or funding or politics or other priorities. So why do we want to offer sexuality education in faith settings? Well, within the context of our own religious values and beliefs and rituals, comprehensive sexuality education can address the spiritual aspects of sexuality, as well as those things in comprehensive sexuality that we're familiar with, the cognitive, the emotional, the physical, and the social aspects. So our whole lives started 25 years ago with a groundbreaking publishing partnership between the Unitarian Universalist Association and the United Church of Christ. Together, the two organizations created a comprehensive curriculum that was quickly lauded as being engaging and creative and effective and developmentally appropriate. And it also embodies the values of self-worth, respect, sexual health, justice, and inclusivity. There is no religious content in the curriculum. Today, 25 years later, OWL covers the lifespan from childhood to adulthood, and you can see that we go, the newest edition is the older adults, and that's for people 50 and above. OWL has not been studied empirically, but it is informed by the U.S. National Sex Education Standards. Each edition is guided by and written and developmentally edited by professional sex educators, and we always field test everything before we publish it. It's used primarily in Unitarian Universalist and UCC faith settings in the United States, Canada, and the Philippines, but we're also aware of its use in these other settings, other faith settings, schools, homeschool associations, colleges and universities, a couple juvenile and adult correctional facilities, youth and community organizations, older adult community and educational programs, and individual families can also use it. We also are open to working with people who want to adapt it for their own purposes. So, for example, we're currently working on a combination of the high school and the young adult curriculum for use by U.S. military UU and UCC chaplains. And the UCC developed an adaptation that incorporates Islamic and Christian faith material for use in several African countries. So I mentioned that Our Whole Lives doesn't have any religious content in it, and that's why it can be used in so many settings. But when we use it in our faith settings, we also use material called Sexuality and Our Faith, and that's a supplement that can be used. Why do we offer it? Well, sexuality education allows us to minister to and be with other people in a mindful and nurturing way, which is what we want sex ed to be. It helps us stand with others through their struggles and their questions, and it helps them learn and grow. So when faith communities offer programs like this that engage the heart, mind, body, and spirit and faith values, we're engaging in ministry and faith formation. So how can faith communities use this? Well, so first of all, it can support members in the wider community's sexual knowledge, health, and pleasure, and that's always important. Again, it can enhance faith formation. It can fill gaps in programming that is not otherwise available through other programs. Some congregations we found use it as a marketing opportunity to bring people in their doors. But we can also honor sexuality across the lifespan. And so when multiple generations of people have access to accurate information and skills and healthy relationships and social decision-making, and all of it's grounded in shared faith values, then we just have a generally healthier community. So if you wanted to get started or help an organization in your community get started, what do you need? Well, we always suggest having a program coordinator or supervisor. So one point person who's going to keep an eye on all the pieces and parts. You want to pick a curriculum that's suited to your values and your participants. I had somebody once say, we'd like to use your curriculum, but we want to get rid of all that gay-friendly stuff. And I said, then that's not Our Whole Lives, because we are inclusive. So you want to select a curriculum that will suit your communities or your settings values. We highly recommend that the facilitators be trained and that they be background checked, especially if they're working with anyone under the age of 18. You want support from the leadership in the religious organization. So you don't want your sex ed program to operate in a vacuum where it's just set aside and it's a little bit. When the leadership of the organization supports the program, then you're more likely to get funding to support it as well. And then you want to also be able to promote the program within your community, and if you're opening your doors to others outside the community as well. Now, the way we do it with the UUA and the UCC at a national level, first of all, we do publish the Our Whole Lives curriculum. We also have accountability readers to ensure that our curriculum isn't doing any harm. So we have readers and reviewers of holding various identities and racial, gender, orientation, and disability or ability, so that they're really reviewing and giving us feedback. We always field test. We offer also our faith materials, which other communities can create their own, of course. We have the program is managed by myself and my colleague Amy Johnson at the United Church of Christ. We are both professional sexuality educators, and I think that's an important aspect of that. We have certified facilitator trainers who use material that gets updated every year. We offer promotional materials to our congregations. We offer educational programming, monthly webinars that are free. We offer support for parents as sexuality educators by means of curriculum and videos and book recommendations. We offer free worship resources so that even the religious leadership has materials, free sermons and background materials and readings and hymns that they can use to create worship services that talk about sexuality in a healthy way. Amy and I provide lectures and presentations for folks who want to learn more about sexuality or about our curriculum. And we have also resources specific to each of our denominations. So one of the things that we feel very strongly about, as I mentioned, is that facilitators be trained. So however your community is going to be using your curriculum, you don't want just a volunteer who says, hey, I'm available. You really want them to know what they're doing so they don't do harm. So when you find a training or create a training, it's going to create a knowledge base that's really important, not only about the curriculum, but about the developmental stage of the people that they'll be working with. They'll understand additional resources that can be used to complement the curriculum. They'll be more committed to your curriculum's values and philosophy. Of course, they'll gain skills in facilitation, which is important. Really important for safety is looking at boundaries and understanding what not to share, and when not to have physical contact or to be alone with children, etc. And then also with the training, individuals can self-assess whether they really want to be sex educators. And the trainers can also assess to see whether they agree that somebody is prepared and comfortable to facilitate. So one of the things that we also think is important is that you continue to educate your facilitators so that it's not just a once and done, they've done a training and then they're good to go, but they're ongoing education. One of the ways that we accomplish that is through Owl Taking Flight webinars. These are on the first Wednesday of every month. Everybody's welcome to join, so I put the link on the slide. These are just a few of the topics that we've covered. If you want to watch only one, then I would say watch the Building an OWL program from the ground up, which has a lot of great tips no matter what curriculum you'll be using. Before you get started, you want to ask yourself a couple questions. Does your organization support comprehensive sexuality education or whichever curriculum you choose to use? What are the ages and developmental needs for your potential participants? Are you looking at kindergartners? Are you looking at 80-year-olds, adults, high schoolers, whatever? Do you have qualified facilitators? Do you have the financial resources to support a program? You don't want to have a program that you can do 1 year and then it ends. And is the political climate safe for you to sponsor a program? Or are you committed to the program regardless of the risks? I highly recommend this book called Sexuality Education Wheel of Context. It's only about $14 in US dollars. It is designed to look at national programs and all the components involved in starting a program, but it has applications to small community programs as well. So please take a look at this Sexuality Education Wheel of Context, which is a wonderful resource. So if you want to look at this as a whole faith initiative rather than just a class on sex ed, what can you do? Well, get the clergy to lead worship services or celebrations in whatever tradition you're from about a range of sexuality topics and not just on specific days of the year. Offer counseling with people who are trained in sexuality. Essential to maintain appropriate boundaries among religious leaders in the faith community so that there's trust there. Welcome families and individuals of all sexual identities and relationship styles. Access LGBTQIA+ inclusivity of your restrooms and resources and name tags and support groups so that everybody feels welcome. And engage in sex-positive political advocacy. If you're ready to get started, my colleague Amy Johnson and I are available to help. We are happy to answer any questions that you might have. You can reach me at owl@uua.org, and you can reach Amy at owl@ucc.org. We are happy to assist you and walk you through the process of starting a program of your own. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Melanie. That was lovely. I love the Our Whole Lives program, and I love that it's done through this faith-based setting. I think that there is so much to be gained in that specific faith-based setting in terms of access to and support of young people, but people of all ages, really, right? And it's one of the things that's the most exciting about it to me is that lifespan element that OWL has to offer.
Yeah, I think so too, because as I said, if you're only focusing on the needs of, say, the adolescents, then who's having conversations with those adolescents? You need to also educate the parents and support the parents. And it doesn't just start in adolescence, as we all know, it starts in very young childhood. So even before kindergarten, but our curriculum starts at kindergarten, of course. So yeah, the lifespan aspect of, and when we look at the older adults, the grandparents talking about issues with their adult children and their grandchildren is an important role as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. And I love that you gave a shout out to Sarah Nasser-Saada's book. Sarah is an active member of WAS. I'm sure that many of the people on here know her well. And so I was like, oh, Sarah. I love
Sarah.
that book too. All right. Well, thank you so much, Melanie. And if you have questions for Melanie or in general would like to chat out things about faith-based sex education, please do drop those in the Q&A box and we'll come back to those at the end of our time together. All right, let's move on to Jaclyn Friedman. So Jaclyn is the founder and executive director of Educate Us, where she's building a movement to change U.S. public school sex education for good. Friedman's work has globally popularized the affirmative consent standard of sexual consent. And Jaclyn's topic today is mobilizing the silent majority for sex education in the United States. Take it away, Jaclyn.
Thank you, Karen. Really excited to be here with everybody. So yes, hi, my name's Jaclyn Friedman. I use she, her pronouns. I am delighted to be with you all today. This is also a new audience for me. And I want to share with you some of the work that we're doing at Educate Us to mobilize a strong silent majority in the United States to not just support, but take action for sex education. At Educate Us, we do a lot of different types of work, all of which are about movement building and mobilization. We work with state and local advocacy organizations that are trying to improve sex education in their communities to help them be more effective in that advocacy work. We mobilize passionate individuals who don't have a way in to advocate for sex education and give them tools to become more effective advocates. We work directly with pro-sex ed candidates, especially for school boards in the United States. There is no federal regulation of sex education, and so a lot of it gets decided on the state and local level, especially at the school board level. And we work hard, and we'll talk a little bit all of this later, on changing the narrative, changing the ways that we talk about sex education to make it something more exciting for people to mobilize around. I want to zoom back and talk about why we do this work and what we're up against, and then talk a little bit about what we do. We really believe in moving beyond individualism as a case for sex education, moving beyond, oh, my own kid really needs this. We know we're up against a lot when we stay in that individual argument. In the US, perhaps in your context as well, a lot of parents do not want to think their kids are going to have sex. And so if you talk to parents about, oh, it'll keep your kids safe from STIs or pregnancy, a lot of them will think, well, that's not going to be a problem for my kid anyway. And so they don't get engaged. We also have a very regressive, authoritarian parents' rights, quote unquote. That's the propaganda movement trying to push to get sex education only in the home, controlled by parents, and control what schools can and cannot teach. But also, there are a lot of people who are affected by sex education who don't have school-age children and who tend not to think that this is an issue they should care about when we only make individual child-based arguments about it. They are very gettable when we make bigger arguments. We know that sex ed, for example, is a key to reproductive freedom. It reduces gender-based violence. For many students, it is the first and best information they get on a whole host of topics related to reproductive freedom, without which we can't have reproductive freedom. And here in the US, now that abortion rights have been undermined, it is more critical than ever for destigmatizing a range of reproductive options. We also know, even beyond reproductive freedom, or because it's key to reproductive freedom and beyond, sex ed, we see it as key not just to reproductive freedom, but community and democracy itself. For so many reasons, I had to decrease the font on this slide. So I'm not going to read them all because I want to get through a lot. But if we want an engaged citizenry, if we want a citizenry who knows how to resolve conflicts non-violently, who knows how to have healthy relationships and engage with each other in a healthy way, if we want to reduce patriarchal beliefs, if we want to ensure that the people who make decisions about our lives have correct information, the politicians passing laws, the judges deciding what does and does not get upheld, they need the sex education too. And also it engages young people in the civic process. Young people care very much about this issue. We'll talk about that more as we go. And younger people here in the US, a lot of them have become a little disaffected by national politics. They can be really engaged in politics when we talk about sex ed being on the ballot at the local level. We know that it's this powerful cultural force because our opposition has known that for a long time, right? In the US, they've been using US taxpayer dollars to fund abstinence propaganda in our schools for decades. We've also seen an enormous spike in anti-sex ed legislation at the state and local level in recent years as part of the authoritarian push here in the United States. We know that Project 2025, which is sort of the right-wing playbook should they gain power, calls for an outright sex ed ban. Just in or out of schools would ban sex education. And they know that because they know, for example, that people who don't understand pregnancy are more likely to support abortion bans, right? They want to raise the next generation to want to erode support for abortion and reproductive freedom and to support patriarchal thinking, because that is what undergirds all authoritarian regimes. So sex ed is fundamental to democracy, and the more people understand that, the more we can mobilize them. The good news is sex ed is actually very popular still in the United States, even after these years of attacks. This is data from Planned Parenthood. This was from last year, and you can see how incredibly popular among parents sex education, not abstinence propaganda, is. It's really impressive. Even 49% of Republicans here support sex education. But why does that not turn into mobilization? Why does that not turn into action? Why does that not turn into policy as often as it should? We posit a few reasons. One is a dynamic called pluralistic ignorance. Even though sex ed, as you just saw, is very popular, most people who support it think that it is unpopular. And so they think that they would be sticking their neck out on an unpopular issue, and their neighbors would judge them, their friends would judge them, and they keep quiet. It also gives room, that silence gives room for misinformation, and I should say disinformation, to spread, and creates a vicious cycle where people then become more fearful about sex education because they have less understanding of what it is. And I find this is even worse among the political class, electeds, and also people who try to get people elected, than even the general population. You know, we have definitely had the experience more than once of talking to progressive organizers about wanting to help candidates that they're working with be more effective speaking about sex education, and them telling us we couldn't work with their candidates because they advise their candidates to stay silent on this issue, which is so foolish, because our messages, and we'll get to that, move even conservative voters 13 points toward wanting to vote for pro-sex ed candidates. Almost everybody but the hardest hardcore right-wing people are movable on this issue. But when we believe that it's controversial, even though it's not, we let them have the floor. And so we have to pop that pluralistic ignorance. We have to help people understand that they actually have the majority opinion here and they can feel free to speak out. But we also, because of all that mis and disinformation, have to pop the bubble of just actual ignorance. And one of the things we've learned is, like, when people learn what's in sex ed, they actually get really excited about it, because most people in the US had subpar, actively harmful, or non-existent sex education. They actually don't know what we mean when we say sex education. And so they're very vulnerable to that misinformation and disinformation. But when we, for example, we made this one-page guide to what's in the National Sex Ed Standards, when you show this to a room of parents who are very stressed about whether they should support sex ed, the temperature in the room comes right down, and they love that it's anti-bullying. They love that it teaches consent. They love that it teaches how to identify a safe adult. They start to say, like, oh, I actually want my kid to learn this. In one of the communities we've worked with, Worcester, Massachusetts, after a info session for parents on the new sex ed curriculum that was being implemented, a parent came up to the instructor and said, I'm so glad my kid is getting this. I opted them out of the other thing. And that was because the opposition was running a misinformation campaign about what was in the new sex ed curriculum that had so little resemblance to what was actually in it that this parent didn't recognize that they had actually opted their kid out of the thing that they were just learned about. And so getting people just information about what sex ed is and what's in it is crucial here. Okay, also our own data, when we do our message research, we also look at our placebos in our groups in our randomized controlled trials that don't see any messages. And we saw that our baseline has actually improved 7% over the last 2 years in people who are ready to vote for a pro-sex ed candidate. And that sample includes both voters and non-voters. And since voter participation in the US is dismal, it's actually a large percentage of the voting population that is actually becoming ready. So that's the good news here. We're seeing movement. So what do we do about all of this? I'll go through some of it, and then also happy to talk more in questions. As I said, we do, these strategies as a review, but I want to get a little bit more into specifics before I leave you about what we're doing. Our focus audiences, we have 3 specific audiences that we focus on. One is the younger generation, which we call Gen Z, ages 14 to 28 currently, and soon the generation coming up behind them. Center right, moderate, and left-leaning parents, basically any parents who aren't hard right, are super gettable on this issue if they have the correct information and a message that helps them move through their fear. And then also engaged left of center folks who maybe don't understand that sex education underlies things they already care about, like LGBTQ rights, like stopping sexual violence, like reproductive freedoms. And when we make that connection for them, whether or not they have school-age children, they can get really excited about mobilizing to support sex education. We explicitly organize with young people. We have a youth advisory board with 10 young people from around the country that work closely with me. I meet with them directly all the time. They also directly advise our organizing partners and our candidates how to more successfully engage with their generation, because we really believe that mobilizing this new generation is key. A third of our actual legal board of directors is under 25. We do this for a lot of reasons. One is philosophical. Young people are the most affected by this issue, and so we have to center them in our work. But also on a practical level, not only are they the best to know how to mobilize their generation, but we have to speak directly to young people because the opposition is, right? And we know that they're especially targeting young men. And young men are very vulnerable to being radicalized. But if we can reach them first, and get in a way that is effective, in a way that speaks their language, we can really do a lot to combat the increasing radicalization of young men, and mostly young white men. Let's say that out loud. So I wanted to share that. I also want to share some of the tools that we made to help individuals get more involved. These are QR codes that you can scan with your phone. When I'm done with the presentation, I will also drop links into the chat. I'm not good at dropping and talking at the same time, but I will share the links directly in the chat after the presentation. So we've made a number of tools. These are just a few of them. We've made a guide to sex education targeted at elected officials that if you fill out a form, you can ask us to send to your school board members on behalf of yourself as a constituent to say, here's a way to understand this issue, and here's some sample policies that you could pass at the school board level. We have developed an advocacy training to make folks who are passionate on the issue more effective at speaking up at public meetings or on social media or to media if they had the opportunity, or to friends and family. We also have a sex ed voter pledge where we ask folks to pledge to support pro-sex ed candidates, and then we help them know when that's on their ballot. So we just are trying to create a lot of really easy ways for people who care about the issue to move from I care about the issue to I'm doing something about the issue. We also, as I've mentioned, have spent a couple of years doing randomized controlled trials on messages, how we should talk about sex education, to move people from that silent support category or even hesitation on sex ed to wanting to take action for sex education, whether that's speaking up about it publicly to pierce that pluralistic ignorance, to voting for sex ed candidates, those sorts of actions. The messages that we've found that succeed the most, and I'm going to give you all the messages, focus on positive community impacts, not on the individual STI and pregnancy prevention that a lot of times we focus on when we talk about sex ed. They talk about bullying. They talk about breaking social isolation. They talk about the majority of parents supporting sex ed and not wanting to be ruled by the small minority that's trying to bully us. What we found as we tried to distribute these messages is actually hard to get people in the movement to change how they talk about sex ed, even though we have data saying this is more effective. So to make it easier, this year we also created 30-second digital ads that organizations can license at no cost to advocate for sex education. I'll be giving you a link if that's something you're interested in. And we tested the ads themselves in the field, and I'm going to show you a little bit of the data to close out to see how much we can gain when we just talk about sex ed in a different way. So this is where you can find the message report on our randomized controlled trials, as well as the digital ads that are available for licensing. I don't think I have time to actually play the digital ads here, which is too bad because they're really great and I love them, but you should definitely check them out and play them because they're really great and I love them. But I do want to close by sharing just a little bit of data about how much even people you would think are already ready to support sex ed are moved when we talk about sex education in new and different ways. So this is parents, and we can look at this data. You can see that the primary questions we asked were about, do you support sex education? And we asked some sub-questions about that. Are you ready to take action for sex education? Are you likely to? And are you ready to vote for a pro-sex ed candidate? Actually, that vote mobilization question was just, are you planning to vote at all in the upcoming elections? And we have 3 ads. You'll see all of them at the link that I just shared and will share in the chat. And you can see that among parents, when they get a pro-sex ed message that is really powerful and goes beyond the usual messages about sex ed, they move an incredible amount, right, on all of those counts. It's harder to get them to want to vote if they're not wanting to vote. But in terms of wanting to take action, in terms of moving them on support, they are very movable when we give them a bigger, juicier, more inspiring argument. We see the same thing in the younger generation, right? And I have many crosstabs on this, by the way, if folks are interested in other data. I'm sharing focus on our 3 core audiences just as an example. +7 points on being ready to take action for sex education when they get a message that resonates with them, that's not just about STIs and pregnancy. It's not at all about that, actually. And then here are our generalized left-leaning people, also incredibly ready to be moved on the issue when we give them a message that really is going to be impactful with them. So I'm happy to get into more detail about what those messages are in the Q&A. I don't want to take up more than my allotted time, but I'm also going to drop the message reports in the chat. If you have questions and ideas that we don't get to talk about in the Q&A, my email is also just jfriedman@educateusaction.org. I'll also put that in the chat. Would love to talk and hear from any of you about how we can help you and also what kind of mobilization work you're doing, because we're always learning from each other. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Jaclyn. That was delightful. And as you're dropping some things into the chat box, I'm not sure if you saw, there was so much excitement building in the chat about everything you were sharing and feeling really connected to it. So thank you for adding those additional links into the chat box. I'm really excited about the work you're doing. You know, I think it's really innovative and exciting. We've also been asked specifically if you can share your slides. Are you open to sharing?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I thought the answer was yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't have asked. But I just wanted to be sure that we had your full consent, affirmative consent, before saying yes. Great. Well, we will get those slides out. I know that Melanie is also happy to share her slides. And yeah, we have some questions popping into the Q&A. Please feel free to keep putting those in there, and we'll circle back to Jaclyn after Chandra. All right. Now our 3rd speaker, I'm so excited to introduce Chandra-Mouli. Chandra is an independent adolescent sexuality and reproductive health and rights learner, communicator, advisor, teacher, and supporter of advocacy, research, and action. What a powerful bio. I love that. And Chandra's topic today is 30 years after the International Conference on Population and Development, Where's the World with Comprehensive Sexuality Education? Welcome, Chandra. Take it away.
Thank you, Karen, and hi, everyone. This year, the world commemorates the 30th anniversary of the International Conference on Population and Development, which took place in Cairo in 1994. There are many firsts with the International Conference on Population and Development, ICPD, but one of the things that it did that's relevant to this discussion is that it placed adolescents and adolescent sexual and reproductive health and rights on the global agenda for the first time. The ICPD called for the provision of sexuality education, and that's what my presentation is about. So a word about terminology. In the United Nations, and I worked in WHO for 30 years, in the United Nations, we generally use the word comprehensive sexuality education. In this presentation, I've used the word sexuality education for 2 reasons. One is that many different terms are used in different places, and a report that we co-published as 6 UN agencies in 2021 said that many countries, including countries from Scandinavia and Northern Europe, which are so progressive in sexuality education, are not yet totally comprehensive. And so we are all in a journey. So I've used the word sexuality education to acknowledge that. 5 points. The first point is that there's solid evidence that children and adolescents need sexuality education and that is when it is well designed and well delivered, it's effective in building knowledge and understanding, attitudes and values and skills, and can promote healthy behaviors and contribute to healthy outcomes if you have all the supportive interventions, for example, access to contraceptives, condoms, and other issues. There's considerable evidence that it does not harm, and that is a pitch that is often made. That's worry that many parents have, and that it is cost effective and can be scaled up and sustained. There's a huge and growing body of program support tools, and if people are interested, we can make this available through the WAS. There's strong evidence from research studies and evaluations of the effectiveness of sexuality education, and North American participants will know these two reviews, these gold standard reviews, but I want to put these aside. And I want to take you to data from Germany, which you probably may not have seen. Germany is one of the small number of Northern European countries which has had a mandatory school-based sexuality education program for over 50 years. Germany also conducts every 5 years a national youth sexuality survey. And I can share this paper with you if you're interested. It's not part of the literature that is widely available in North America, but the point is, data from this study shows that young people are having sex later. When they have sex, it is planned. They recall the first sexual encounter as pleasurable, and that they are much more likely to use contraceptives. There's a little increase in non-use of contraceptives among men in a number of European countries, and we believe that this is because of social media influence and the perception that HIV is passed. I'll come back to that in a minute. So the point is, there's considerable evidence from large-scale surveys and not little studies here and there. We have a whole body of tools for advocacy, for program design, for measurement, and sexuality education has been included in a number of international and regional commitments. One example of this is the Eastern and Southern Africa Ministerial Commitment, formulated by 21 countries in 2013 and put in place as a joint effort by these countries. We did an evaluation of this commitment, and there's a paper describing their findings. Notable progress, but unmatched with progress in terms of population level data, but considerable progress in terms of what has been done, injected new energy into efforts. That's the bottom line. My second point, sexuality education is increasingly present in national policy strategies and guidelines. Curricular reviews show that content that the government sets is often too little and too late and does not match students' interests. I think Melanie mentioned that to some extent. And that's why we call for school-based sexuality education to be complemented by sexuality education outside school. Teachers everywhere are uncomfortable in discussing, if a young boy says, I have an erection all the time, I don't know what to do with it. I ejaculated into my underwear and, I've tried to wash it and it doesn't go away. I mean, teachers struggle with these kinds of issues. And, after many years of doing sexuality education, I'm comfortable with that. But, it's not true for many people who are beginning to get involved in this kind of work. Research studies, evaluations show that there's poor fidelity and quality of school-based delivery of sexuality education. I mentioned this stock-taking review by the UN agencies listed in the bottom of that document photograph. A large number of countries have policies and strategies in place. There are problems with them. They are limited in scope, and I'm going to point to two things. One is that many countries incorporate sexuality education in terms of biology only, fallopian tubes and ovaries and cross-section of testes, and not about, how do you say no to someone who wants to go out with you and do it in a way that doesn't break your friendship with that person, and allows that person to save face, which is such a big issue in so many parts of the world, because it can sometimes be followed by an acid attack by a boy who's hurt by your refusal. And then teacher preparedness. We know from many studies that one-off training of teachers, one-off training can improve knowledge, skills in the workshop setting, but rarely translate into the workplace. But we still do cascade training, which very quickly translates into Chinese whispers, turned into uselessness. So we need new approaches to improve, teacher performance. I don't even talk about training, talk about performance, because training is only one of many approaches that you can use to improve performance. Here's an example from Ghana. The issues that teachers face are lack of resources, lack of time, embarrassment about topics, insufficiently being prepared, pushback from students. So lots of issues in both in the content and in the delivery. Let me move to my third point. I don't see that this is a problem as such. I think this is a journey. As long as you move forward in a muddled way, 30 years from the International Conference on Population and Development, child marriage rates have declined, female genital mutilation rates have declined, adolescent pregnancy rates have declined, HIV infection in sub-Saharan Africa has declined, all with imperfect interventions delivered in an imperfect way, but coming together in a messy way, they seem to add up into something that is useful. So we don't need to get it perfectly right every time. We just need to continue to work on it and improve what we're doing. The third point, the focus of sexuality education has evolved from a population control through HIV prevention to sexual and reproductive health, and it's increasingly embodying justice, reproductive rights and justice. Champions are pressing for more and opponents are pushing back. And this is, I'll come back to this. It's a, snake and ladders game. You go 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I'm going to give you a concrete example of this. England now has teenage pregnancy, is mandatory school-based sexuality education since 2020. An NGO called Women's Aid said that, like in many other parts of the world, it's focused on biology. Girls are interested, boys are not. And, what do kids want? They want teachers to discuss these issues comfortably, not feel awkward, not rushing it. So, whether you're talking about England or Bolivia or Uganda or Sri Lanka, it's more or less the same thing. We need stronger content delivered with better quality. And it needs to be done in the school because schools are where most of the kids are, but it needs to be complemented with what happens outside, and I'll come to that. Much of the focus of our development has been girls, for the right reasons. But in countries like Rwanda and Bangladesh, what we've seen is you unlock the shackles, even half the shackles, and girls take off. In 2 generations, there are more girls in university in Bangladesh than boys. But that's great. But what's happening is boys are getting left behind. Boys and men are struggling. And, what's happening in the US with the, non-college educated young men is what you see around the world. They're angry with the women who are succeeding, and they're angry with the world, which doesn't allow them to be where they were, sitting on a pedestal. Boys and men are struggling, and we increasingly need to find ways to reach them. And many programs are struggling to do that and working to do that, and working in the face of influencers who are reaching them very effectively. The UNESCO, with UNICEF, has now put in place a foundational education program, which I think, like Melanie and Jaclyn said, needs to start reaching young people very early, from 5, from 7. Sexuality education really should begin at home from the age of 1 or even earlier. But what we're doing is school-based education starting from 5, with a foundation not only about sex, but on a number of other issues. Problem is, in countries like India, where I'm from, the content of education with a right-wing government in place has been watered down. So it's every iteration of the curriculum has got watered down more and more. So the curriculum on sexuality education in India doesn't talk about sex or sexual relationships or romantic relationships. For all practical purposes, it could be about hand washing to prevent diarrhea. That's the problem. It's so watered down because people are scared to offend those small vocal minority that Jaclyn spoke about, and so that's why we need to push this forward. My fourth of 5 points: discomfort and resistance to sexuality education is not new. What is new is that it is better organized, well funded, and more assertive. It's also part of a globally connected pushback. This is a wonderful document that you should read. False Pretenses, the Anti-Comprehensive Sexuality Agenda, Weaponizing Human Rights. The passage of the law in Uganda criminalizing sexual activity has a direct link to Utah in the US. So what you have is right-wing groups in the US not only messing up the situation in the US, but exporting their poison all over the world. And this is really such a tragedy. Countries like Uganda, which had a good sexuality education program in the time of HIV, now have bought into this rhetoric and bought into the money that is coming with this rhetoric. So WHO is standing up to this quasi-scientific misinformation put out, for instance, by the Institute of Research and Evaluation, trashing the UN's evidence base on sexuality education. And we are standing up to this, and we have a whole strategy to build support and overcome resistance to sexuality education in the UN. The last point is that a small but growing number of countries are scaling up sexuality education. And although enrollment and continuation of school is increasing, we have to reach kids outside school. I'm 66 years old. Earlier this year, I completed my PhD in school-based sexuality education in 6 countries. I documented sexuality education programs in the countries listed on the slide. And what we found is that these countries, and these are unlikely countries, Pakistan, one state of Pakistan, one state of India, Mexico, Uruguay, what they did was 6 things. They put it on the agenda. They placed it on national agendas. They planned the scale up. They secured funds from within and without. They used data and implementation experiences to scale up. They promoted and safeguarded its sustainability. And they worked hard to deepen and extend support and to anticipate and respond to resistance. NGOs in India and Pakistan have a standard operating procedure to deal with backlash when it arises. The approaches they used were mostly not new, but they brought this together. And I'd like to show you this slide. This is from Pakistan, Sindh. I mean, when you think of Pakistan, you think about Islamic fundamentalism, weak governance, country crumbling. But I think it's doing better in sexuality education than India is, and probably, and I think streets ahead of the way US is. What they've done is step by step, they've scaled up sexuality education. They've used, for example, the case of Zainab, a small girl who was brutally raped in the Punjab province of Pakistan, and used that to get governmental support for sexuality education, which is now being scaled up in Sindh and Balochistan with government resources. So snake and ladders, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. In countries that have scaled up sexuality education, champions from the country who can say, we have not taken money from the UN, we have not taken money from the global north. This is our children, this is our work, and we have achieved this. Just to close, much of my talk has been about school-based sexuality education, but we have to focus on those enormous numbers of girls and boys who are out of school and need to reach them with approaches outside the school, including digital approaches. The global program on child marriage, for instance, in 12 countries of the world, has a whole program to reach girls in safe girls groups and build self-confidence, build competence, and teach them about their bodies and about their health. I want to close with an example from Jamaica. This is a program called Second Chances.
Chandra, I just want to say you have maybe like 3 more minutes for the closeout.
That's absolutely fine. Thank
Perfect.
you. I have 2 minutes, 2 slides. So the case of Jamaica. So Jamaica, no continuous education opportunities for pregnant adolescents. It's there in law, but girls get thrown out of school, although this has changed with time. Limited to no re-entry opportunities. High second birth rates among adolescent mothers. So an organization called the Women's Center for Jamaica put in place a program targeting adolescent mothers with counseling for adolescent mothers and their families. And they use a cute term called baby fathers, or the fathers of the babies. They reach them, they help them get back to school, and when they are pregnant, they give them supplemental education so that they don't fall back. They give them contraception, they give parenting support, and over 40 years, they have achieved huge successes around in Jamaica and exported this to so many other parts of the world. States like Texas in the US could clearly benefit from a model like this. Many countries in Southern Africa are taking models like this and applying them. Look at this testimonial. I was 15 when I was sexually assaulted and got pregnant. I wasn't ready to be a mom. Today, I'm a medical technician thanks to the programming support I got. To conclude, in the 30 years since the ICPD, there's growing consensus that sexuality education is needed and is proven to be effective. A growing number of countries are delivering sexuality education. Alongside efforts to provide sexuality education in school, more needs to be done to reach those who are out of school. While there are programs in place, we need to strengthen these programs. Resistance is such a big issue in today's world. And, we are all looking at the election with bated breath to see what's going to happen. Because not only because of what's going to happen in the US, but because of what could happen in countries that we are working in outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chandra. That was such an interesting and detailed report on the research around the world. I really appreciate everything you shared. We've spoken about, I'm particularly passionate about the support that young men are receiving right now in this realm of sexuality education, and also just broadly in their lives as young men, and finding ways for there to be positive representations of masculinity and manhood across the spectrum. So thank you so much for your work and sharing. We will have, I think we're moving into our conversations with everybody. As we're doing that, I would just like to note that the WAS 27th Congress is coming up next June. It's going to be in Brisbane, and the call for proposals is currently open. So anybody who is interested, please go to this website, submit a proposal. I'm sure that the committee would love to see everything you have to say. And there will be so many more conversations like this one happening in Brisbane next summer. I will be there. I will love to meet as many of you as are able to come. So please put that on your radar. All right. Thank you all three so much. I have, there's a few questions popping into the Q&A, and I'd love to start with Melanie. The question that I have for you here is, can you please elaborate on the concept about content adaptation, for example, and how it needs to be gay friendly?
Sure. So OWL can be, if it's called Our Whole Lives, if you say I'm offering an Our Whole Lives program, we need people to use it as it's written, as it's designed. So not cherry picking workshops. If people want to adapt it for their particular setting and only use, say, half of the workshops, that's fine, but don't call it an Our Whole Lives program because it won't be comprehensive anymore. There are other adaptations. For example, in the Philippines, bullying is not a particular problem. And so they don't use the bullying workshop that is in Our Whole Lives. They also don't have contraception options because of the Catholic power structure in their country. So they bring in nurses who are local, who know natural family planning. So that's their adaptation. So people can adapt it for whatever their culture or their participant needs are. The comment about being gay friendly was somebody who was from a very Christian conservative background, who wanted to use Our Whole Lives in his church, but he didn't want to include anything that was affirming of LGBTQ folks because that wasn't in their value system. So he wanted to use the health stuff, the healthy relationship stuff and the biology stuff, but not that. And I just told him that's not possible. There are other curriculas that might work for you, but our whole lives won't be it. So that's what that was referring to. Thank you.
Yeah. So the next question, I'm going to start with you, but I'm also interested in hearing Jaclyn and Chandra's response to it, I think. So the idea of an inclusive sex education model for faith-based spaces is intriguing. However, religious beliefs often lead to a morally focused curriculum that conflicts with the global standards for CSE. What challenges arise in this context, and how does your model address them?
Well, so Our Whole Lives is secular. There is absolutely no religious content in it, even though it's published by 2 religious organizations. So that means that anybody who aligns with those values of self-worth, sexual health, responsibility, justice, and inclusivity can use Our Whole Lives. The other challenges of offering the faith really can, that's up to whatever setting is using it. For example, the United Church of Christ material includes biblical scripture that the Unitarian Universalist faith supplement does not. So a Jewish community could use Jewish theology to put their OWL content into context, or a Hindu congregation could do the same. So the challenges are really, does the organization using it, how much do they want to wrap around in their faith values? And do their faith values support comprehensive sexuality education? That's the first challenge to overcome, is really thinking about what are the value systems that you're dealing with and whether this is the right curriculum for you, either Our Whole Lives or another comprehensive curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Jaclyn?
Well, we don't teach sex ed. We organize for sex ed. So I don't have a specific curriculum to speak to, but I do want to say that we need to stop seeding faith-based institutions to the opposition, right? The idea that people of faith oppose sex education is just as mythological as the idea that people of faith that everybody opposes sex education, or the majority of people. It's a myth. It's pluralistic ignorance. Almost every Jewish community is going to support it. Many Christian communities too. You know, in Massachusetts, where I live, we, in trying to get a bill passed on the state level, organized faith leaders to support our bill. And we had hundreds of faith leaders sign on from Methodist Church, from obviously Unitarian, from a wide variety of faiths. And so not all Christian churches are opposed, and certainly not all faiths at all are opposed to sex education. Many of them support it. And I think that we need to do better outreach and connecting with people of faith who are supportive of sex education, because the impression right now is that when religion gets involved, you know, they're opposed to sex education. But people of many, many religions and many faiths support sex education.
Yeah, to that point, Jaclyn, I have heard from Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Jewish congregations, Quakers, Methodists, folks from the ELCA, you know, all sorts of theological perspectives. Again, it goes back to, is your value in favor of comprehensive sexuality or is it not? And it's not, your faith tradition needn't preclude that.
Yeah. And so, Chandra, what do you think about this on the global stage? You know,
Yeah,
I know that
thank you.
for all kinds of organizations, and I'm sure you have as well.
I'll give you one example, and that's from Pakistan. There was a question about how you deal with resistance when it arises. Now, in Pakistan, like in many countries, you'd get periodic attacks from fringe groups in the media, fringe political leaders, and fringe groups in the religious establishment. Troublemakers, they don't have anything to do, they want to create trouble. And so they'll start attacking programs doing sexuality education and saying they are stooges of the US or the Netherlands, or that they are corrupting the children of Pakistan. And so their modus operandi is, you know, they would go and file a court case against a female teacher, you know, intimidation, bullying. So these NGOs, what they have done is they have a standard operating procedure. When there's a court case like this, they take the court case, they have a female lawyer who stands up to it, goes to court, and these court cases dissolve. You need to stand up to bullies with strength. They never go and negotiate with these organizations in their offices. If they want a meeting, they ask for a meeting in the government, in the provincial office. This is standing up to resistance. So what I'm saying is you need a well thought through, careful. So another approach they use is if there are attacks, they're corrupting children, they're putting condoms on the penises of 5-year-olds. So what they say is they bring 5 journalists to the school and say, can you please stay here for 5 days, see what we're doing, we'll pay you for your time, and then you write the stories. So you need a strategy to stand up to this. Now, the other way, positive way, Sheena Hadi is one of my great heroes, in Pakistan. What they've done is they involve all groups in the community and in deciding on the curriculum. They work very hard at engaging community leaders, school managers before going to teachers. They involve religious leaders in this, but they don't give the deciding vote to religious leaders. Religious leaders are part of the leadership in the community. They should not have a deciding vote in any religion, because too much power is abusive, is abused, has been abused in the generations if you look back. But they have a perspective. They are powerful. We need to engage them, give them importance, listen to their wisdom, but not be bullied by them.
I love that answer. And that leads me to, I think my next question, which I'm going to start with Jaclyn, and then Chandra, I'm interested in you following up on it. Jaclyn, how do you feel like your model of a C4 organization might translate into other countries?
Sure. And let me
define
explain
C4.
what that means. Yeah. So a brief lecture on US tax code. In the US, the federal tax code for NGO is called 501c3. That's what most NGOs are, is a 501c3. That's just the number for the code. And NGOs are forbidden from doing anything that might influence the outcome of an election. Fundamentally, I'm oversimplifying slightly, but I want to make sure that the ideas get across. The next code is 501c4, which in the US is still considered a nonprofit or an NGO, but for up to 40% of what we do can be attempting to meddle with the outcome of an election. Not meddle is the wrong word, but it influenced the outcome of an election. So we can endorse or oppose political parties or candidates, those sorts of things. And so Educate Us is a 501c4 organization. There are some downsides to that make it harder to raise money that I won't get into. But the upside of that is we can do political mobilization work. We can say, if you support sex education, here's the candidate you should vote for, and here's the candidate you should vote against. We can come out and ring the bell and say, I'm trying to actually talk about this in a not political way, because I know that in the US, WAS has a 501c3 status, and I don't want to get political here, but some candidates for president are very supportive of sex education. Some are not, would like to ban it. And we can explicitly talk about that in ways that most organizations, in fact, all the national organizations in the US cannot, which is one of the reasons I started Educate Us, is because I just thought, well, part of the reason that we're in this mess is we can't get political leaders to believe that there is actual majority here support for sex education and act like it. And we need political mobilization in order to address that. So I don't know what the tax codes look like in any other country. But I do think that we need to think about sex ed as a political issue, because the opposition treats it as a political issue. And if we do not address it with political movement building, we just are ceding ground to them.
Chandra, how do you feel about this from the global perspective of how to do that political work within each country?
I came to the US in March this year for a conference in San Diego, and I went back very worried and very shocked. We hear a lot about abortion, but the same battles are taking place on contraception and on sexuality education. And what is really frightening for me is that in the US, I knew that from a paper that we wrote about San Antonio in Texas, that the decision on the content of sexuality education is made at the school level by the school health board. I pray and I'm fighting as much as I can to make sure that this model is not exported to other countries, because this is exactly the kind of chaos that opponents are looking for. I gave you the example of Germany. Mandatory school-based sexuality education mandated from the central level with a curriculum, with teaching materials, with a training program in place, of course, adapted to different realities and large areas. You need to adapt it for different needs. Mexico, where Esther is from, is a very large and complex country. It also has a mandatory school-based sexuality education program, and some elements of the curriculum can be modified depending on the context, where they have indigenous communities, for instance. But the core stays there. So I think, we work very hard to build support and to, and as I said in some of the chat messages, not to take the support that we have for mandatory education for granted. There's such a concerted fight that, it can easily be turned back. Look at what happened in England. Last year, a spineless government in England, one of the joys of leaving the UN and retiring is I can say these kinds of things now without any worry. Spineless government in England, in the face of US exported resistance, called for a review of the curriculum. And now the review is still going on. But this is exactly what weak governments do when they are pushed to a corner. And what we need to do is to make sure that these governments feel supported and they have the evidence that they need. One of the things we're doing in the UN is we are getting professional associations, the World Association of Sexual Health, the International Association of Pediatrics, the International Association of Pediatric and Adolescent Gynecology, and so on, to publish statements of support for sexuality education. Esther, we could put them in the list of materials afterwards. All these organizations have published statements saying that it is not that this corrupt and overfed UN officials who are doing this, it's the whole world who believes this is useful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Melanie, I have a question here for you. And I'm going to add on to it. The question is, to what extent is the topic of pleasure addressed in the AL curriculum? Many faith-based perspectives are reluctant to include this angle, and I would love to hear your perspective on the role that pleasure can play in a faith community.
Well, I think not just in a faith community, but in any sexuality education, I think pleasure is important, because we can't just talk about consent, about, well, say, here are boundaries and here's what to say. No, I think it's also important what do you want to say yes to? And what are you saying yes to? So, for example, we have a workshop in our middle school curriculum called Reframing Abstinence. And it's helping people to think about, well, what is okay? Is it okay to pleasure myself? Is it okay to pleasure a partner through kissing? Is it okay to pleasure a partner through touching or other non-intercourse kinds of behaviors? When we don't talk about the importance of pleasure and understanding what gives you pleasure, there can be a mindset of young people that, well, it's either nothing or all the way. And all the way, I'm sure that'll give me pleasure, whether it will or not. But we're not telling them it's okay to experience pleasure in many ways. We're revising our high school curriculum now, and we're being more intentional about the ways that people who are asexual can experience pleasure as well. So the importance of any kind of sensuality that you might enjoy, whether it's eating something that you like, or taking a bath that you might like, or just being in company with somebody. Those are ways of having pleasure too. So we definitely emphasize the importance of pleasure. In the older adult curriculum, we talk about the many ways that people can experience pleasure, again, despite whatever age-related changes they might be going through. So across the lifespan, we can emphasize the importance of pleasure rather than just doing the scary slides and the scary lessons. let's make sexuality education focus on the good stuff about sexuality, because sexuality is such a wonderful part of our humanity.
But what do you feel like is the role of that dialogue within a spiritual context, Melanie? Does that question make sense?
It does, and I would say that my answer might differ from those from people from other faith traditions.
Sure.
Because within Unitarian Universalism, there are people of many faith backgrounds and belief systems. I myself am not a theist, so I am not going to say God gave me this body, God gave me the ability to have pleasure, but somebody else might, or gods may have, right? But that's not my spirituality. My spirituality is that by my particular being human makes spirituality part of me, and a wonderful part of me. And that is definitely part of our belief system, as you use, is that sexuality is to be honored, regardless of the package that it comes in, or the orientation that it comes in, or the gender identity that it comes in. So I think that faith traditions can honor sexuality in different ways, and honor pleasure in different ways. I can't speak to the value systems of other faith traditions.
Karen, could I come in on this, please?
Sure. Yeah. Why don't you come in, and then we want to hear from Jaclyn on this one too. I feel like pleasure
Go
is
ahead, Jaclyn.
for
I can come
everyone.
in after you.
Okay, yeah, I am very passionate on this issue. So, one thing I will add is, from a Jewish perspective, pleasure is actually part of our faith. You know, our bodies are created by God and we are meant to give ourselves and other people pleasure. That is one of the ways we honor God. So, there's a wide variety of attitudes from faith communities on pleasure. I was lucky to be raised in one. In that way. I was actually once asked by a student at a Jesuit school I was speaking at, like, how did I overcome like shame or something? And I was like, I didn't get raised with it. And it was like a little mind blow moment. But the thing I want to say is pleasure is not optional in sex ed. And the reason is because when we don't talk about pleasure, the people whose pleasure is typically dominant and centered, which is, you know, very often men. In the US, it's cisgender white men. Their pleasure is handled, right? Their pleasure is reflected in all the media around them, the idea that they should enjoy sex. But people who are vulnerable, especially vulnerable to sexual violence in the US, that's girls and women, that's LGBTQ students, young people, that's students of color, are not being given the message that they should enjoy sex, right? A lot of them, especially women and girls and queer students, are being told that it's actually terrible for them to go anywhere near sex. And what we know happens is if you believe that and you have not been told sex should feel good to you, then when you get into an abusive or harmful relationship, you do not know that you have the right to expect differently. We are literally, the opposition likes to talk about grooming. We are literally grooming girls and women and LGBTQ people we are grooming them to accept abuse when we don't talk about the universal right to pleasure and sex. And I feel incredibly passionate about that. It makes it harder to leave or even notice or report when we're being harmed in harmful relationships. It leaves people incredibly vulnerable.
Thank
So
you,
from
Jaclyn.
my side, 3 points. One is we published a systematic review on the evidence that pleasure-based approaches improve health outcomes. I put that in the chat. So, you know, WHO is based on science, and our science says that when you include pleasure in the discussion, its uptake of the message and of action is much more effective. So that's one. Our tools, the International Technical Guidance talks about sex as normal and talks about sex as pleasurable. So, you know, so we talk about this as normal and pleasurable. In schools, we recognize that this is a challenge and we've talked about discomfort with teachers in many schools, but in outer school work, we press hard for this to be included. I'm 66 years old. I tell in meetings, last week I was in Delhi for a meeting with 10 ministers of health, and I said I had sex before I was married. I went to a pharmacy far away from home. I got condoms from a pharmacy where I knew my mother would never go. To these 10 ministers of health from South Asia. I think we have to normalize it. We have to normalize it by people like us talking about it and not about third persons. So, we have to use a multiple number of ways and say, I'm happily married. I have a wonderful sex life. I masturbate from time to time. And I say, you don't need to raise your hands, but most of you in the room possibly do the same as well.
I love that approach, Chandra. I love that you are willing to speak openly about your own sex life. I think that's a powerful model. I'd like to just do another round and talk about parents, just like, what do we see as the role of parents? How are you interacting with them? Where are you offering them support? Where do you think others could offer them support? Melanie, let's start with you.
Thanks, Karen. Well, our whole lives is based on a core premise that parents and guardians should be the primary sexuality educators of their children. But we have to then back that up by supporting them. So one of the ways that we do that is we recommend, we can't mandate anything, but we strongly recommend that before anybody offers an OWL program, that they have a parent or guardian orientation. These are about 2 hours. The parents and the guardians are introduced to the materials. But more than that, they're introduced to thinking about how they learned about sex and how they want their children to learn about sex and how they want to maintain conversations. So that's one of the things that we do. The kindergarten through first grade and the 4th through 6th grade curriculums include something called home links. And that's not homework, but it's just like, this is what we talked about today, and here's how to keep that conversation going at home. And by the way, here's some books that you can read. The 7th grade and up curriculums, that's middle school and up, don't have those home links, but certainly young people are encouraged to continue those conversations. We have a free curriculum that anyone can download called Parents and Caregivers as Sexuality Educators. And that is, again, discussion-based, thinking about how do you want to have these conversations? How do you want to support your children? And we have a series called Under Your Wing, which is little 5-minute videos about how to have conversations about gender and how babies are created and how families are formed. With wonderful, inclusive books, recommendations. So I think that we would be remiss if we say parents ought to be sexuality educators without giving them the tools to do that. So that would be my answer.
In Switzerland, Karen, where my kids grew up, I've been here for 30 years. So there's a fantastic system of sexuality education in Swiss Romand, the French part of Switzerland. So it starts very early and goes through all the way through school. And, over time, there's discussions and lots of cleverly thought through activities. But in the early stages, before any discussion, parents get a notice. We're going to talk to your kids about this. These are the issues that we're going to raise. If you have a briefing, you come and talk to us, we'll talk to you. This is the issues. This discussion is likely to raise questions at home. Here is some information for you to answer questions. If you want to talk, come and talk to the school counselor. Many of the parents are from countries where there's no sexuality education. Many parents, even in the global north, have not had sexuality education. So, this kind of demystifies it and normalizes it. There's no option for you to withdraw your child from the class. You have the option to understand and engage, and with the support of the school, participate actively. My daughter has epilepsy. She goes to a special needs school. She got exactly the same sexuality education as my son, who does not have special needs. And in this case, we got a briefing saying children with special needs are much more vulnerable to abuse. And that's why sexuality education is even more important in this case, so that they are well informed. And in addition, they need to be a little bit more protected. So I've used the example of Switzerland because we can do that. We can do that, and it doesn't cost more money. It just takes the effort to engage parents. It's easy to say parents are difficult to engage. Here, every parent gets a notice. Then over time, it becomes normal then.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Jaclyn, just a brief moment maybe so that we can
Yeah,
wrap
I
up.
mean, the answer is everything that we presented on that we're doing with parents, right? So we're training them to be advocates. We're training them on what's in a sex education curriculum so that they actually know it's stuff that they want their kids to learn. Most parents want help of schools to learn to teach sex ed. They don't want to be all by themselves teaching it. In the US, they didn't even get good sex ed. A lot of our candidates for school board that we endorse and help to win are parents, and that's why they got mobilized to run for school board. So we're working with parents all day, every day.
Love it. Okay, I have one last question that I think is really perfect to wrap up with. It's from Deborah Hafner, who many of you know. Thank you to Chandra for pointing out that there has been tangible progress on sexual health indicators in the past 30 years. And yet, there has been significant growth in the percentage of people actively opposing it. 30 years ago, SIECUS was using the type of messaging and organizing that Jaclyn is suggesting at a time when fewer than 10% of people were in opposition. It is now much higher. Where do you all see hope for the future? So let's end on hope.
Can I jump in there? I actually don't think it's much higher. I think they have more money and they're better organized. They are louder and they're making a bigger impact, but I don't think it's much higher. Our data just don't show that. The opposition is not as big as they want you to think it is. They are more powerful, but I just want us to just make a distinction. So that is what gives me hope, right? That is what gets me up every day, which is I know if everybody who says to a pollster or at a school board meeting, like, I support sex education, gets mobilized, if we really get mobilized to take action, we are a huge majority in most countries of the world. And it really is just a question of moving that tacit support into actual visible action. We have the people power. They have the money power. They have the authoritarian power. Those are real powers, and I'm not trying to undermine them, but they don't have the people. We have the people. The people can win when we organize them.
I couldn't agree more. Esther Corona is one of my heroes. She's been doing sexuality education for 60 years. And, you need people like that who will not give up. Esther will stop doing it the day she dies. And I hope that's in 25 years or more. But, essentially what you have is you have to have staying power. And you have to continue and doggedly do a small amount of work every day, move this agenda forward. And there will be setbacks. And that's part of the game. We shouldn't give up. Really pursue this. They will get bored and get tired of this and do something else. And if we are passionate about this, we will continue.
For
Thank you,
my
Chandra.
part, hope comes from seeing the increased interest in offering faith-based sexuality education. Sadly, because of changes in schools, but the fact that people are looking for creative solutions, I think, is hopeful. Also, we've had guests on our All Taking Flight webinars who have talked about the boots on the ground work that's being done to fight the anti-trends, the folks, so that there really are a lot of people who are getting together to protect trans folks and non-binary folks. Same for LGBT rights, that there are people organizing for that, for reproductive justice. We have to learn from the people who are already doing it, who have been doing it for years. But a lot of work is being done, and that gives me a lot of hope. And the other thing, to Chandra's point, our whole lives will celebrate 25 years in 2025. And we keep growing, we keep adapting, we keep revising. And that gives me hope that this wonderful program has lasted for so long.
Thank you all so much for being here. I'm seeing so many thanks in the chat box and in the reactions from people. I know this has been incredibly powerful, and I'd like to pass it over to Esther to wrap us up here in our last minute or so.
Thank you very much First of all, I want to say that there is hope because you are hope. You, the speakers, you, the facilitators, you, the audience, and because we have progressed in 60 years, we have progressed. We are not where we are, where we were 50 years ago. We have now Cairo, we have Nairobi, we have what Chandra has mentioned, all this kind of support. But first of all, and we have you. So thank you very much for being with us through this fantastic journey. And we hope in behalf of WAS, you will join us in more webinars and of course, join us in Brisbane and in all our activities. So thanks again. And we will see you very soon in our next webinar. Goodbye.